Welcome to Jolene's Stories, where a woman who gave everything finally reclaims it.
My name is Leah Shaw. I am 49 years old. On a Sunday morning in May, I stood at a lectern in First Presbyterian Church in Cedar Falls, Iowa, holding a red grading pen and a folder thick enough to change the air pressure in the room. 200 people were watching me. My brother Gerald was in the third pew, and the color was leaving his face the way ink leaves paper when you hold it under running water. My daughter Morgan was gripping a set of documents she had planned to hand me with a smile. My sister Diane was halfway out of her seat, mouth open, the speech she had rehearsed dissolving somewhere between her teeth and her tongue. And I had not yet said the worst thing. I had not yet told them about the 8,030 days, but I am getting ahead of myself. To understand how a woman ends up standing in front of her entire church holding 22 years of receipts and a red pen, you have to go back. You have to go back to a house where the coffee was always made before sunrise, and the grading never stopped, and the woman everyone leaned on was slowly being described, by the people she carried, as someone who could no longer stand. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to say something. If you are listening to this and you have ever been the person in a family who does everything while someone else takes credit for noticing, this story is going to sit in your chest. Welcome to our channel. We tell stories about people who were underestimated by the people closest to them and what happened when the quiet ones finally opened their mouths. If this one lands for you, hit subscribe and leave a comment. I want to know how many of you have been the Leah in your family. Now let me take you back to where this began, because it did not start with a church service. It started with a pair of reading glasses and a Thanksgiving table. I have lived in Cedar Falls my entire adult life. I teach AP History at Cedar Falls High School, and I have taught there for 24 years. I started when I was 25, fresh out of the University of Northern Iowa, Marcus Shaw's new wife, and my mother's only reliable child. Marcus was a good man. He was a civil engineer who built things that held weight, and he married a woman who did the same, though my structures were made of lesson plans, grocery lists, medical appointments, and the raw math of keeping a household breathing when there was never quite enough air. My mother, Dorothy, was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's when I was 27. I was pregnant with my second daughter, Morgan, when the neurologist sat us down and said the word that would define the next 2 decades of my life. Marcus held my hand under the table. Gerald, who was 25 at the time and already dabbling in insurance licensing, said he would help however he could. Diane, who was 30 and living in Des Moines with her husband, said the same thing. Those were the last useful sentences either of them ever spoke about our mother's care. I became Dorothy Shaw's primary caregiver. I bathed her. I fed her. I managed her medications, her doctor visits, her insurance claims, her declining ability to recognize her own kitchen. I did this while teaching 5 sections of AP History, while raising 2 daughters, while grading essays at midnight with a red pen that became as familiar to my hand as my own fingerprints. Marcus helped. Marcus was the only one who helped. He would take the night shifts when Mom wandered. He would sit with her on Saturdays so I could grade in the quiet of our bedroom. He never once suggested that someone else should do it. He never once said the words that would come later from the mouths of the people who did nothing. Marcus died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. I stood at that same lectern at First Presbyterian and read from Ecclesiastes, and did not cry because I had spent 20 years learning how to hold things inside my body that would destroy other people. I went home that night and graded 12 essays because the students still had a deadline, and the red pen does not care if your husband is dead. After Marcus died, the house changed. Not physically. The duplex on Tremont Street was still the same yellow-sided building he and I had paid off together, the mortgage stamped satisfied in 2019. But the energy shifted. I was alone with the routines. Coffee at 5:45, 3 essays graded before sunrise. The walk to school past the mailbox. The walk home. Dinner alone. More grating. Sleep, if sleep came. It was ordinary. It was mine. And for a little while, nobody questioned it. The first crack came at Thanksgiving, 3 years after Marcus died and 8 months after my mother finally passed. 23 relatives were packed into Diane's house in Des Moines. I had driven 2 hours to be there. I had brought a sweet potato casserole and a stack of essays I planned to grade after dinner because midterms were Monday. At some point during the meal, I set my reading glasses down to serve myself seconds. When I reached for them, they were not where I had left them. I checked the counter, the bathroom, my coat pocket. I found them 10 minutes later under a napkin someone had tossed on top of them. It was nothing. It was a pair of glasses under a napkin. But Diane turned to the table, to all 23 people, and said, loud enough to carry over the noise, "See? This is what I mean. She's been getting forgetful lately. Has anyone else noticed?" I froze with the glasses in my hand. The table went quiet for a beat, then resumed, and the moment passed. But something had been planted, not in the soil of truth, in the soil of repetition. Diane said it the way a teacher introduces a thesis statement, clearly with eye contact, positioned at the start of a paragraph so the listener knows what to remember. I told myself she was being dramatic. I told myself she was a big sister doing what big sisters do, worrying out loud in a clumsy way. I told myself this even though my body disagreed. My appetite left. The sweet potato casserole tasted like nothing. That night, driving home on Interstate 20 in the dark, I replayed the moment 7 times, and each time the words sounded less like concern and more like a headline being tested before publication. I did not know it yet, but Diane had been talking to Gerald, and Gerald had been talking to Morgan, and Morgan had been talking to Kyle. The anomalies accumulated the way they always do, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow accumulation of sentences that do not quite make sense, behaviors that require a second look, kindnesses that arrive with a faint smell of strategy. Morgan moved back into the duplex in January. She was 27, working part-time at a marketing agency in Waterloo, and she told me she wanted to keep an eye on Mom. She said it standing in the doorway with 2 suitcases and the kind of smile that made me feel guilty for the hesitation I swallowed before saying yes. She was my daughter. She needed a place. The duplex had a second unit that had been empty since Marcus died. Of course she could stay. Within 2 weeks, Kyle was there every evening. Kyle Brannigan. He was 31, thick-necked, polo shirts tucked into khakis, the kind of man who says passive income in the same tone a preacher says salvation. He was Morgan's boyfriend, and he flipped houses. Or he tried to. From what I gathered, he had flipped 2 houses in Waterloo, one at a loss, and one that broke even, and he had formed an LLC called Branco Properties that existed mostly as a logo on his truck and a line on his Instagram bio. I did not mind Kyle at first. He was polite. He called me Ms. Shaw. He brought pizza on Fridays. But slowly, the living room became a meeting room. I would come home from school and find Kyle and 2 or 3 other men sitting around my dining table with laptops open, talking about lot values and teardown timelines and contractor bids. Morgan told me they were just brainstorming. I nodded. I graded my essays in the bedroom. I told myself it was temporary. Then I noticed the mail. A thick envelope from the Iowa Secretary of State addressed to Branco Properties, LLC at my address. 1142 Tremont Street. My duplex. Registered as the business address for Kyle's company without my knowledge or consent. I held the envelope in my kitchen and felt the first real tremor. Not anger yet. Something quieter. The feeling you get when you pick up a stone and find the ground beneath it is hollow. I should have said something then. I should have asked Morgan directly. But I was tired. I had been tired for 22 years, and tiredness does something to your instincts. It rounds the edges of alarm. It convinces you that confrontation requires energy you have already spent. I put the envelope on the counter, and Morgan threw it away before I brought it up. I noticed that too. Around the same time, I started sleeping poorly. Not insomnia exactly, but the shallow, watchful sleep of an animal that senses a predator without seeing it. I would wake at 3 in the morning and lie in the dark listening to the house, and the house would be quiet, but the quiet felt occupied. My body was compiling evidence my mind refused to read. Then Gerald made his move. I did not find this out immediately. I found it out because of a mistake. And the mistake was the first real gift this situation gave me. Gerald, my brother, 52 years old, a failed insurance broker who had cycled through 3 agencies in 15 years, contacted my physician's office. He called as next of kin concerned about early onset dementia and requested my medical records. By law, he had no right to them, but the office was understaffed. The request came on a form that looked official, and someone released a summary before I could intervene. I learned this because my doctor's office called me to follow up on the records request from your brother. I was sitting at my desk at school. 3rd period had just ended. The hallway was full of teenagers, and the phone was pressed against my ear, and the woman on the other end was saying words that made the fluorescent lights feel suddenly too bright. I asked her to repeat herself. She did. Gerald had requested my records. Someone had sent a summary. The summary included routine notes from my last physical. Blood pressure slightly elevated, sleep disruption, mild weight loss. All consistent with grief. All consistent with the life of a woman who had buried her husband and her mother within 2 years. None consistent with dementia. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that Gerald now had a piece of paper with a medical letterhead and my name on it. And I knew, with the certainty of someone who has graded 10,000 essays and can identify a thesis statement at 40 paces, that he was building an argument. My hands shook when I hung up the phone. Not from fear, from recognition. The body knows before the mind names it, and my body recognized the architecture of what was happening because I had spent 22 years inside an architecture. The scaffolding of caregiving, the load-bearing walls of obligation, the careful engineering of a life that holds other people up. I knew what a structure looked like when someone was building one, and I knew what it looked like when the structure was designed to contain me. That evening, I sat in my car in the school parking lot for 20 minutes before driving home. I was not crying, I was calculating. I was thinking about Diane's comment at Thanksgiving, about Morgan's sudden need to keep an eye on me, about Gerald's records request, about Kyle's LLC at my address. I was arranging them in sequence the way I arrange events on a timeline for my students, and the timeline was telling a story I did not want to read. The first real discovery came on a Tuesday evening in March, and it came because I did something I had never done in my life. I searched my own house like a stranger would. Morgan was at Kyle's apartment in Waterloo. I had 2 hours. I started in the living room where Kyle held his meetings. The dining table had been pushed against the wall, and behind it, wedged between the table leg and the baseboard, I found a manila folder. It was not hidden well. It did not need to be, because no one expected the woman they were calling forgetful to look. Inside the folder were 3 things. The first was a printout of a real estate investment forum post. The listing read, "Incoming Teardown, motivated family sale, $310,000 lot value." Below the listing were 4 interior photographs of my duplex, my kitchen, my hallway, my bedroom. The bedspread Marcus and I had picked out together at a JCPenney in Waterloo 11 years ago was visible in the photograph. The red grading pen was on the nightstand. They had photographed my home while I was at school. I sat on the floor with the printout and my vision narrowed. The room shrank to the size of the page in my hands. $310,000. That was the number they had assigned to the place where I had bathed my mother, raised my daughters, graded 24 years of essays, held my husband's hand the night before he went to the hospital for the last time. Not the home, the lot, the dirt beneath the home. They were not selling my house. They were selling the space my house was taking up. The second item in the folder was a printout of Kyle's LLC registration, Branco Properties, registered to 1142 Tremont Street, Cedar Falls, Iowa. My address, filed 4 months earlier. The third item was a handwritten note in Morgan's handwriting. It said, G says filing goes in next week. Need her signature or POA by April. G. Gerald. POA. Power of attorney. Filing. Guardianship. I put the folder back exactly where I found it. I took photographs of every page with my phone. I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the bed that had been photographed without my knowledge, and I pressed my hands against my face and breathed until the shaking stopped. Then I took out my red pen and a legal pad and I began to make a list. The scope of what they had built revealed itself over the next 3 weeks, and each layer was worse than the last. I started where any AP history teacher would start, with the primary sources. I pulled my own financial records going back 22 years, every receipt I had ever saved from my mother's care. I am a woman who keeps receipts. Marcus used to joke that I could reconstruct any year of our lives from the paper trail alone. He was right. I spread them across my bed in chronological order and I counted. Doctor visits, medications, home health aid hours when I could afford them, which was rarely, adult diapers, nutritional supplements, mobility aids, the shower chair, the hospital bed we rented for the last 3 years of her life. The total, when I added it, was $347,000. $347,000 of my money and Marcus's money spent caring for Dorothy Shaw, while my brother contributed nothing and my sister visited 9 times in 20 years. I counted the visits too. I had dates. That was the foundation. Then I went deeper. The ally who helped me was not a dramatic entrance. It was Janet Prewitt, the church treasurer at First Presbyterian, a woman I had known for 19 years, who approached me after Wednesday evening Bible study and said, very quietly, "Leah, your brother asked me for your tithing records last month." I told him no, but I think you should know he asked. I looked at Janet. She was 63, a retired accountant, and her face was the face of a woman who had done a calculation and did not like the answer. I said, "Can we talk?" She said, "I thought you'd never ask." Janet became my investigative partner. She had the analytical mind and the professional caution I needed. Over the next 2 weeks, sitting in her kitchen after Bible study, we assembled the picture. Gerald had filed paperwork to become my legal guardian. I had already found this out because the filing arrived in my own mailbox. Gerald had used my address as the respondent address, which meant the court notification came directly to me. I held the envelope from the county courthouse, and the handwriting on the address label belonged to someone I had trusted for 52 years. Inside was a petition citing the medical summary Gerald had obtained from my doctor's office, and a fabricated statement from Morgan describing me wandering the neighborhood at night. I have never wandered the neighborhood at night. I grade essays at night. I have graded essays at night for 24 years, and every student who has ever received a paper back from me with red ink can testify to that. But it got worse. Janet helped me pull the public records on the demolition permits. Kyle had submitted permits to the city of Cedar Falls for demolition of the duplex at 1142 Tremont Street. The permits referenced a power of attorney granting Gerald Shaw authority over my property. I had never signed a power of attorney. I had never discussed a power of attorney. The document Gerald submitted was a forgery. Janet and I sat in her kitchen and stared at the permit application, and Janet said, very carefully, "Leah, this is fraud." And I said, "I know." And she said, "You need a lawyer." And I said, "I know that too." I hired David Chen, an elder law attorney in Waterloo, and I told him everything. He reviewed the guardianship filing, the forged power of attorney, the demolition permits, and Kyle's LLC registration, and he said, in the measured tone of a man who has seen these cases before, that I had a strong basis to challenge everything and to pursue criminal referrals. But he also said something else. He said, "Mrs. Shaw, do you want to fight this in court or do you want to end it?" I thought about that for a long time. A court fight would take months. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for the Monday after Mother's Day. Gerald had timing on his side. But there was another option. There was Mother's Day itself. I learned about the Mother's Day plan from the church secretary, Brenda Kowalski, who called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said, "Leah, your daughter Morgan called the church office to arrange a special event during the Mother's Day service. She said it was a surprise for you. She requested a projector for a slideshow and a table near the lectern for refreshments. She also asked if the microphone could be set up for multiple speakers." Brenda paused. "Leah, she used the phrase, loving intervention. I thought you should know." I set my phone down on my desk and stared at the stack of essays I had just finished grading. My red pen was still in my hand. I looked at it. I had spent my life correcting errors in red ink, marking where the argument fell apart, where the evidence was insufficient, where the conclusion did not follow from the premises. I had taught thousands of students how to build an argument that could withstand scrutiny. I had never used those skills for myself. Until now. The masquerade began. 6 days until Mother's Day. I knew what they were planning. They did not know I knew. And every hour of those 6 days was a performance that cost me something I do not have a name for. The first night, Morgan came home with flowers. Daisies, from the Hy-Vee on University Avenue. She put them in a vase on the kitchen counter and said, "I just want you to be safe, Mom." She hugged me, and her perfume smelled like my mother's soap, and I wanted to cry and scream at the same time. I hugged her back. I said, "Thank you, sweetheart." I smiled with muscles in my face that were operating independently of everything happening behind my eyes. Later that night, after Morgan went to bed, I found the guardianship pen in her purse. Not a regular pen, a high-quality ballpoint with a soft grip, the kind you buy when you want someone to sign something important without hesitating. It was sitting next to a folded copy of the voluntary guardianship papers, already filled out, with a yellow tab marking the signature line. I photographed everything. I put it back. I went to my room and pressed a pillow against my face and breathed into it until the screaming in my chest subsided. The second day, I graded essays at the dining room table. Morgan came home early. I heard her key in the lock, and I had approximately 4 seconds to slide the folder of caregiving receipts under a stack of AP European history exams. My hands moved with a speed and precision that contradicted everything they were saying about my cognitive abilities. Morgan walked in, glanced at the table, saw only essays, and said, "Still grading, Mom. You work too hard." I said, "Old habits." She smiled and went to her room. I sat there with my heart rate at something well above normal and the taste of adrenaline in the back of my throat, metallic and ancient. The third day, Kyle came over for dinner. Morgan made pasta. Kyle sat across from me and talked about the housing market with the enthusiasm of a man who has never been told he is not as smart as he thinks he is. At one point, he said, "Lot values in this neighborhood are going through the roof, Ms. Shaw. You're sitting on a gold mine." I looked at him and said, "Is that right?" And he said, "Oh yeah, easily $300K for a teardown lot this close to campus." He said this to my face, in my house, at my table. while eating pasta my daughter made in my kitchen, and I smiled and said, "Well, it's a good thing I'm not going anywhere." And something in Kyle's face flickered, just for a half second, and then Morgan changed the subject. The fourth day, Gerald called. He had not called me in 2 months, but suddenly he was warm and chatty, asking about school, asking about my health, saying he was looking forward to the Mother's Day service. He said, "Diane and I have been talking, and we just think it would be nice for the whole family to be together." I listened to his voice, and I heard the insurance broker in him, the salesman's cadence, the carefully modulated warmth of a man who is closing a deal. I said, "That sounds wonderful, Gerald." I said it the way I say interesting argument on a student's paper when the argument is neither interesting nor an argument. He did not hear the red ink in my voice. The fifth day, I almost broke. I was sitting in Janet's kitchen, going over the timeline one more time, and Janet said, "Are you sure you can get through 2 more days?" And I said, "I have been getting through things for 22 years. And she looked at me with the careful eyes of an accountant reviewing a balance sheet that does not balance and said, "That's what worries me. You're used to enduring. I need you to be strategic." She was right. Janet was always right. She was the voice that kept me from confronting Morgan at the dinner table, from calling Gerald and reading him the demolition permits over the phone, from walking into the principal's office and demanding to know why my own daughter's phone call had more weight than 24 years of exemplary teaching. Janet said, "Not yet. You need all of it. You need the congregation to see all of it at once, because if you do this piece by piece, they'll explain each piece away. Together, it's undeniable." The fifth day was also the day I discovered the doorbell camera footage, and this is where Kyle's own technology turned against him. Kyle had installed a video doorbell on the front door of the duplex months ago. He told Morgan it was for security. What it actually was, I believe, was a way for Kyle to monitor who came and went from the property he was planning to demolish. The footage was stored on an app, and the app was linked to Morgan's tablet, which Morgan left on the kitchen counter when she went to shower. I did not plan to look. The tablet chimed with a notification. I glanced down. The notification was a motion alert from the doorbell camera, and beneath it was a preview of a recording from 3 weeks earlier. A man I did not recognize was standing on my front steps with a clipboard and a measuring tape. Kyle was beside him, and Kyle was speaking. I put in Morgan's earbuds, which were sitting next to the tablet, and I played the recording. Kyle's voice, clear as a bell. "The old woman doesn't even know what day it is. She's going into assisted living after the guardianship goes through. Family's all on board. We're looking at teardown and rebuild, 4 units, probably break ground by August." The old woman. I was inside the house when he said those words. I was grading AP history essays about the Reconstruction era with a red pen while a man stood on my porch and told a stranger I did not know what day it was. I saved the recording. I emailed it to myself and to David Chen and to Janet. Then I put the tablet back exactly where it had been, and I went to my bedroom, and I sat on my bed and I held the red pen, and I did not cry. I did not cry because I had passed through the territory where tears are useful. I was in the territory where evidence is useful. I was in the territory where the woman who spent her life teaching students to build arguments from primary sources was finally building her own. If you are listening to this and your hands are clenched, stay with me. We are almost at the church. Subscribe if you have not, because what happened on Mother's Day morning is the reason I am telling this story. The 6th day, Saturday before Mother's Day. Everything was ready. David Chen had prepared a cease and desist letter regarding the guardianship filing and the forged power of attorney. Janet had organized the financial records into a binder with tabbed sections. I had my 22 years of caregiving receipts, totaling $347,000, printed in a spreadsheet that ran to 14 pages. I had the doorbell camera recording on my phone. I had the photographs of Kyle's real estate listing. I had the LLC registration. I had the demolition permits with the forged power of attorney attached. I had Morgan's handwritten note referencing Gerald and the filing deadline. I had everything. That evening, Gerald called one more time. He was cheerful. He said, "Leah, tomorrow is going to be a really special day for you." And for the first time in 6 days, I told the complete truth. I said, "Yes, Gerald, I believe it will be." The Saturday night before the confrontation, I did something I had not done since Marcus died. I sat in the kitchen at the table where I had graded 10,000 essays and I talked to him. Not out loud, in my head. I told him what they had done. I told him what I was going to do. I told him I was scared, not of them, but of what it would mean to stand in front of 200 people and turn my family inside out. And then I picked up the red pen and I held it the way I hold it every day, between my index and middle fingers. The cap clicked twice, and I felt something settle. The pen was not a weapon. It was a witness. It had been in my hand for every essay, every receipt, every note, every correction. It would be in my hand for this. I did not sleep. I graded 3 essays between midnight and 2 in the morning because the ritual calmed me and because my students deserved their papers back on Monday, whether or not my family was imploding. At 4 in the morning, I showered. At 5, I made coffee. At 6, I put on the navy blue dress Marcus had always liked. At 7, I drove to First Presbyterian Church with the binder on the passenger seat and the red pen in my pocket. The fellowship hall was set up when I arrived. 200 chairs. The projector Gerald had requested was humming at the back of the room, throwing a blue rectangle onto the wall behind the lectern. A table had been set up with refreshments, pink tablecloth, a cake that said, "Celebrating Leah," in cursive frosting. Morgan was arranging napkins. She was wearing the cream-colored blazer she wore to job interviews. She looked nervous, but she smiled when she saw me, and the smile was so perfect it made my stomach clench. Gerald was in the third pew, wearing a sport coat, laptop open, clicking through the slideshow one final time. I caught a glimpse of the slides as I walked past. Photographs of me. Photographs of me with our mother. Photographs that had been chosen to tell a specific story. Leah overwhelmed. Leah exhausted. Leah needing help. One photograph showed me carrying my mother to the bath. In the photo, I am 34 years old, and my mother weighs 91 pounds, and I am bending under her weight with my jaw set, and my arms trembling, and it is the most intimate act of love I have ever performed. Gerald had captioned it, "Leah's Selfless Journey," and I wanted to tear the projector from the ceiling. Diane arrived at 9:15. She positioned herself near the microphone stand. She had note cards. She had practiced. She was going to deliver what Morgan had called, in her phone call to the church, a loving intervention. Diane, who had visited our mother 9 times in 20 years. Diane, whose hands never got wet. Kyle lingered near the back, arms crossed, scanning the room the way a contractor scans a building he is about to demolish. The service began at 10. Pastor Reinhardt opened with a prayer. The congregation filled in. Families, couples, elderly members, young parents with children. 200 people who had known me for years. The mail carrier, Tom Dawkins, was in the 5th row. The church treasurer, Janet, was near the side aisle. Brenda Kowalski, the church secretary, was in her usual spot near the back. My neighbor, Carolyn Myers, who had watched Kyle's appraiser measure my lot from her front porch, was 3 rows behind Gerald. After the opening hymn, Pastor Reinhardt said, "We have a special presentation this morning, honoring one of our most dedicated members." He gestured toward the front. Diane began to stand. Gerald's finger hovered over the laptop keyboard, ready to advance the first slide, and I walked to the lectern first. I did not run. I did not push. I simply stood up from the fourth pew and walked forward with the binder under my arm and the red pen in my hand, and I arrived at the microphone before Diane reached it. Diane stopped mid-step. Her mouth opened. I looked at Pastor Reinhardt. He hesitated. For a long moment, he stood with his Bible in one hand and the uncertainty of a man who has been asked to choose between institutional order and moral clarity written across his face. Then Janet Prewitt leaned forward from the side aisle and whispered something in his ear. I do not know exactly what she said. I know that afterward, the pastor looked at me, and he looked at Gerald, and he looked at the slideshow frozen on the screen, and then he stepped aside. He yielded the lectern. I set the binder down. I clicked the red pen twice. The sound was sharp in the silent room. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling the way a judge's gavel echoes in a courtroom, and I felt the vibration of it travel through the wood of the lectern and into my fingertips. I said, "My name is Leah Shaw. I have taught AP History at Cedar Falls High School for 24 years. I want to tell you what has been happening in my home." Gerald's hand moved toward the laptop. I said, "Leave the slideshow up, Gerald. I want everyone to see that photograph of me carrying our mother to the bath. I want them to see it while I tell them what I am about to tell them." The room went still. Not quiet. Still. The difference is that quiet is the absence of sound, and stillness is the presence of attention. 200 people were present. I could hear the overhead fans turning. I could hear the faint electrical hum of the projector. I could hear someone's watch ticking 3 rows back, each second a small metallic heartbeat in the silence. The light through the stained glass windows threw colored patches on the floor. Blue and gold and a deep arterial red that landed on the carpet just in front of where I stood, as if someone had placed it there on purpose. I opened the binder. I started with the caregiving. I told them about Dorothy Shaw. I told them about the diagnosis when I was 27. I told them about the 22 years that followed. I did not dramatize. I reported. I said I had compiled every receipt, every medical bill, every pharmacy purchase, every home health aid invoice I had paid for from my own checking account and from Marcus's checking account over 2 decades. I said the total was $347,000. I heard a murmur move through the congregation like wind through grass. I said, "During those 22 years, my brother Gerald contributed $0 to our mother's care. My sister Diane visited 9 times. I have dates." I looked at Diane. She sat down slowly, as if her knees had made the decision without consulting her brain. Her note cards hung at her side. The top card fluttered to the floor and landed face up, and I could see from the lectern that it began with the words, "We love you, Leah, and because we love you." The sentence was never going to end honestly, and now it would never end at all. I said, "I calculated it last Tuesday. 8,030 days of caregiving. 192,720 hours of being the person everyone called first. And not once in 22 years did anyone in my family ask me if I had eaten that day." The room did not gasp. The room absorbed. 200 people processed that number, 8,030 days, and I watched it land in their bodies. Some of them put their hands over their mouths. Some of them looked at Gerald. Some of them looked at the frozen photograph of me carrying my mother, the photograph Gerald had chosen to illustrate my decline, and they saw something entirely different now. They saw a woman who had carried everything for everyone. An elderly woman in the second row, Helen Dietrich, who had been a member of this church for 40 years, reached up and touched the cross around her neck and held it, and her lips moved, but no sound came out. A young father near the middle aisle pulled his daughter closer to his side, as if the numbers I was speaking had weight enough to press against the people in the room. I turned to the next tab in the binder. I said, 6 months ago, my daughter Morgan moved into my duplex. She told me she wanted to keep an eye on me. Within weeks, Her boyfriend Kyle registered his house-flipping LLC at my address without my knowledge. I held up the registration printout. Branco Properties, 1142 Tremont Street. Kyle, at the back of the room, uncrossed his arms. His hands went to his sides. His weight shifted toward the door. I could see the tendons in his neck tighten from 30 feet away. The polo shirt, tucked neatly into his khakis, suddenly looked like a costume he wanted to take off. I said, Kyle listed my duplex on a real estate investment forum as an incoming teardown, motivated family sale, $310,000 lot value. He included photographs of the interior of my home taken while I was at work. I held up the printout. The photographs were visible to the first several rows. The image of my bedroom, Marcus's and my bedroom, the JCPenney bedspread, the red pen on the nightstand, the reading lamp still angled the way Marcus had set it before he got sick, was projected in the minds of everyone close enough to see. I watched Morgan's face. She did not move. She had gone entirely pale, the cream blazer now looking like a costume from a play she wished she had never auditioned for. Her hands were flat against her thighs, pressing down, as if she were trying to keep herself from floating away or falling through the floor. Gerald said, from the third pew, "Leah, this isn't the time or place for—" I said, "Gerald, I have the floor, and I have your guardianship petition." The room shifted. People who had been sitting back leaned forward. I heard the creak of wooden pews, a sound like a ship adjusting to a new current. The woman beside Gerald, someone I did not recognize, shifted her body 6 inches away from him, a small instinctive distance that said everything. I pulled the guardianship filing from the binder. I read from it. I read Gerald's petition to become my legal guardian, citing a medical summary he had obtained from my physician's office by calling as next of kin concerned about early onset dementia. I read Morgan's fabricated statement describing me wandering the neighborhood at night. I said, I have never wandered the neighborhood at night. I grade essays at night. Every student in this room who has ever been in my class can confirm that their papers came back with red ink by Monday morning, which means their teacher was awake and working, not wandering. 3 teenagers in the back nodded. One of them said, loud enough to carry. She handed mine back at 7:15 a.m. A small ripple of something, not laughter, something warmer, moved through the room. Another student, 2 rows over, said quietly but clearly. She wrote a full paragraph of feedback on mine. The ripple deepened. 24 years of red ink were testifying on my behalf, 1 student at a time, and I had not asked them to speak. They spoke because the evidence was in their hands. They had carried it home in their backpacks. Gerald stood up. His sport coat was buttoned wrong. I had not noticed it before. But now I saw that the bottom button was in the wrong hole, and something about that detail, the sloppiness of it, the carelessness of a man who could not even dress himself correctly but wanted legal authority over my life, steadied me. His tie was slightly askew too, pulled to the left, and there was a smudge on his collar that might have been coffee. The insurance broker who wanted to manage my affairs could not manage his own appearance on the morning he planned to take my home. He said, Leah, you're proving our point right now. This behavior is exactly what we've been worried about. This is an episode. I let his words hang in the air. I gave them 5 full seconds. I wanted the congregation to hear them, to taste the shape of them, to feel the precise weight of a man calling a woman's clarity an episode. 5 seconds is an eternity in a silent room. I counted them by the ticking of the watch I had heard earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I said, Gerald, sit down, I'm not finished. He did not sit down. He looked at the congregation, performing concern, spreading his hands in a gesture he must have practiced, and said, You can all see she's agitated. This is what happens. Diane, tell them. Diane did not move. Diane was staring at the tabbed binder on the lectern with the expression of a woman who has just realized she is on the wrong side of a primary source. Her mouth opened once, closed, opened again. No sound came. The note cards were still in her hand, but her fingers had gone loose, and a second card slipped free and spiraled to the floor. She did not reach for it. I said, "Gerald, you submitted a power of attorney to the city of Cedar Falls authorizing the demolition of my duplex, a duplex that is paid off, a duplex that is mine." I held up the demolition permit. The paper was steady in my hand. I noticed that. My hand was steady. After 6 days of performance, after 6 nights of swallowed screaming, my hand was steady when it mattered. This power of attorney bears a signature purporting to be mine. I did not sign it. My attorney has confirmed it is a forgery. Would you like to explain that to the congregation? Or shall I continue? Gerald's face drained. It was not a metaphor. I watched the blood leave his skin in real time, starting at his forehead and moving down as if someone had pulled a plug. The sport coat seemed to hang differently on him, as though his shoulders had narrowed in the space of a breath. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it. His jaw worked once, twice, the muscles flexing under skin that had gone the color of candle wax. He looked at Morgan. Morgan was looking at the floor. Her hands had moved from her thighs to the edge of the pew, and she was gripping the wood with white knuckles, holding on to the last solid thing in a room that was dissolving around her. I said, "I have one more thing." I took out my phone. I said, "Kyle installed a video doorbell on my front door. The footage is stored on an app. 3 weeks ago, the camera recorded Kyle speaking to a home appraiser on my porch." I pressed play. Kyle's voice filled the fellowship hall, amplified through the phone's speaker, which I held to the lectern microphone. "The old woman doesn't even know what day it is. She's going into assisted living after the guardianship goes through. Families all on board. We're looking at teardown and rebuild. 4 units. Probably break ground by August." 200 people heard it. The words bounced off the vaulted ceiling and came back down and hit the room a second time. The old woman. 4 units. Break ground by August. Each phrase landed separately, like stones dropped into still water, and the ripples collided with each other. I watched the recording reach the back rows. I watched people turn to look at Kyle, and I watched Kyle receive 200 gazes at once, the combined weight of an entire congregation seeing him clearly for the first time. His face went through 3 expressions in rapid succession: surprise, then calculation, then something raw and cornered that I recognized from grading papers. The face of a student who has been caught plagiarizing and is searching for an explanation that does not exist. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever experienced. It was the sound of a room full of people recalibrating everything they thought they knew about a family in 4 seconds. It was the sound of 200 people breathing and not one of them speaking. It lasted 11 seconds. I know because I counted. Kyle moved toward the door. Tom Dawkins, the mail carrier, who was built like a man who carries 40-pound mail bags up hills for a living, stood up in the 5th row and positioned himself in the center of the aisle. He did not say anything. He did not need to. His shoulders filled the space between the pews. His arms were at his sides, relaxed, but his feet were planted the way a man plants his feet when he has decided he is not moving. Kyle stopped. He looked at Tom. Tom looked back at him with the patient, unhurried expression of a man who has all day. I said, "I was inside the house when Kyle said those words. I was grading AP history essays about the Reconstruction era. I was using a red pen. I was sitting at my desk the way I have sat at my desk every weeknight for 24 years. I held up the red pen. The light from the stained glass window caught it, and for one moment the pen threw a thin red line of reflected light across the lectern, a mark as sharp and deliberate as any I had ever made on a student's paper. This pen. I was using this pen. I knew what day it was. I knew what century it was. I knew the names of all 112 students in my classes, and I knew which ones had turned in late work, and I knew which ones were struggling with primary source analysis, and I knew all of this while a man stood on my porch and told a stranger I did not know what day it was. Someone in the middle rows started crying. I did not look to see who. I heard it, though. A single sharp intake of breath followed by a sound that was not sobbing but something closer to recognition. The sound a person makes when a story touches the bruise they have been protecting. Another person, somewhere to the left, made a similar sound. Then a third. The sounds were quiet and individual, and they did not merge into anything dramatic. They simply existed, scattered through the room like small fires lit from a single source. I closed the binder. I placed my palms flat on its cover. I could feel the thickness of it beneath my hands. The 14 pages of spreadsheets, the photographs, the permits, the forged signature, all of it compressed into a stack no more than 2 inches thick. 22 years. 2 inches. I said, I did not come here today to ask for pity. I came here to tell the truth. Because the truth is a primary source, and this family has been operating on secondary sources and fabricated ones for long enough. And then something happened that I did not plan. Janet Prewitt stood up from the side aisle. She adjusted her glasses. She smoothed the front of her blouse. She held a single sheet of paper in her hand, the way an accountant holds a document that has been reviewed and verified and found accurate. She said in her clear accountant's voice, I want the congregation to know that Gerald Shaw requested Leah's tithing records from the church 3 months ago. I declined the request. Here is the written record. She held up the document. Then Tom Dawkins, still standing in the aisle, his body a wall between Kyle and the exit, said, I want the congregation to know that I observed Kyle Brannigan photographing the interior of Leah's home through the windows on at least 3 occasions. I photographed him doing it. Here are the photos. He held up his phone. The screen was bright enough that the people in the nearest pews could see the image. Kyle, crouched at a window, phone raised, capturing the inside of a home that did not belong to him. Then Brenda Kowalski, the church secretary, stood up at the back and said, I want the congregation to know that Morgan Shaw called the school principal and suggested Leah was having episodes at home. The principal asked me to process an early retirement suggestion. I refused. Here is my written account. Her voice was steady and precise, the voice of a woman who had kept church records for 15 years and understood that documentation is a form of devotion. Then Carolyn Myers, my neighbor, stood and said, I watched an appraiser measure Leah's lot from the sidewalk. He had a clipboard and a tape measure, and Kyle was beside him pointing at the foundation. I took a video from my front porch. Here it is. She held up her phone, and even from the lectern I could see the small bright rectangle of the video playing. 2 figures on my property, measuring the bones of my home. One by one, 11 members of the congregation stood. 11 people who had each been holding a fragment of the truth. The mail carrier who saw the photographs, the church treasurer who blocked the records request, the school secretary who refused to process the retirement, the neighbor who witnessed the appraiser, a fellow teacher who had been asked by Morgan if Leah seemed confused at work, a church deacon who had overheard Gerald making phone calls in the parking lot, speaking in the low, urgent tones of a man arranging something he did not want overheard. The woman who ran the pharmacy where I picked up my blood pressure medication and who had been asked by Gerald if Leah's prescription suggested cognitive issues. 11 people, standing, holding documents and phones and written accounts, forming a wall of witnesses that stretched from one side of the fellowship hall to the other. They did not coordinate. They did not plan. They had each been carrying their piece alone, unsure of what they were seeing, unsure if it was their place to speak. My voice was the permission they needed to assemble. 31 people total rose from their seats and stood beside me or near me, or simply stood where they were. 31 members of the congregation who had known me for years, who had seen me grade essays at the diner on Saturday mornings, who had watched me carry my mother into this very church for communion when she could no longer walk. They stood, and the physical mass of them, the simple vertical fact of their bodies choosing a side, made the remaining people in the room turn to look at Gerald, at Diane, at Morgan, at Kyle. The pews creaked with the movement. The sound of 31 people rising is not a dramatic crash. It is a slow, rolling thunder, the sound of wood and fabric and shoe leather and bone, one body at a time, until the room has rearranged itself around a new center of gravity. And the family shrank. I do not mean they became smaller people, though in a way they did. I mean they physically compressed. Gerald's shoulders drew inward. His hands, which had been spread wide in that gesture of performed concern, came together in his lap and clasped each other, fingers interlocked, squeezing. Diane's head lowered until her chin nearly touched her chest, and her hair fell forward and hid her face, and the note cards she had been holding slipped from her fingers entirely and scattered on the floor at her feet like leaves. Morgan's hand, the one that had been holding the guardianship papers, dropped to her side, and the papers slipped to the floor, and she did not pick them up. They landed face up, and the yellow signature tab caught the light from the stained glass window, a small bright flag marking the place where my daughter had intended to erase me. Kyle was pressed against the back wall, trying to disappear into the exit, and Tom Dawkins was still standing in the aisle, feet planted, and Kyle was not going anywhere. The pastor looked at Gerald and then looked at the Bible he had set down on the first pew. And the pastor's face, I will never forget this, the pastor's face held the expression of a man who was looking at someone he would never invite back. It was not anger. It was not judgment exactly. It was the quiet, final reclassification that happens when a shepherd realizes one of his flock has been wearing wool that does not belong to him. Diane clapped the loudest when the slideshow showed me bathing our mother. But her hands were the ones that never got wet. The aftermath unfolded over weeks, and each consequence arrived with the specificity of a grade on a paper. Clear, documented, earned. Gerald's guardianship petition was dismissed. David Chen filed an emergency motion the Monday after Mother's Day, and 3 community members, Janet, Tom, and Brenda, submitted affidavits detailing what they had witnessed. The judge read the affidavits, reviewed the forged power of attorney, listened to 17 minutes of oral argument, and dismissed the petition in 20 minutes. She looked at Gerald over the rim of her glasses when she issued the ruling, and she said, for the record, that the petition was without merit and supported by fraudulently obtained documents. She also referred the forged document to the county attorney's office for investigation. Gerald's attorney, a junior associate from a firm in Waterloo who had clearly not been told the full story, packed his briefcase with the mechanical movements of a man who was already composing his withdrawal letter in his head. Gerald's insurance brokerage, which had been barely surviving on a handful of local clients, lost its last 2 within 10 days. Both clients attended First Presbyterian. Both had been in the fellowship hall on Mother's Day. Neither said anything dramatic. They simply transferred their policies to other agencies, and when Gerald called to ask why, one of them said, "I don't do business with people I can't trust." That was all. The other did not return his call at all. Gerald's office on 4th Street, a rented room above a print shop, went dark by the end of June. The sign came down. The window went bare. Diane's husband, Roger, filed for legal separation 3 weeks after Mother's Day. I heard this from a mutual acquaintance, not from Diane. Roger had apparently sat in silence during the entire 2-hour drive back to Des Moines after the service, and when they arrived home, he asked Diane one question. "Did you know about the forged power of attorney?" Whatever Diane's answer was, it was sufficient for Roger to call an attorney the following morning. I did not feel satisfaction at this. I felt the hollow recognition that a lie, once spoken in a room full of witnesses, travels until it finds every relationship it can damage. Morgan was asked to vacate the duplex within 30 days. David Chen sent the letter. Morgan did not argue. She packed her things in silence over 2 weekends while I was at school. I know this because each time I came home, more of her belongings were gone. First the suitcases, then the toiletries from the bathroom, then the cream-colored blazer from the closet in the second unit. She did not leave a note. She left the daisies. They were dead in the vase by then, brown-edged and drooping over the rim, the water cloudy and stale, and I threw them away on a Tuesday morning before making coffee. The vase I washed and put back in the cabinet. It was a good vase. It did not deserve to be discarded for what had been put in it. Kyle's LLC was flagged by the county assessor for fraudulent property listings. The real estate forum post was taken down, but screenshots had already been submitted to the assessor's office by Janet, who understood the importance of preserving digital evidence the way she understood the importance of preserving financial records. Completely, redundantly, and in multiple formats. Kyle's name was removed from the property records associated with my address. Branco Properties went quiet. The truck with the logo on it stopped appearing in Cedar Falls. I saw it once more, 6 weeks later, parked outside a gas station in Waterloo, the logo already peeling at the edges, and then I did not see it again. The family did not lose a lawsuit. They lost Cedar Falls. The diner on Main Street where Gerald used to have breakfast stopped holding his usual booth. Not officially. The booth was simply always occupied when he arrived, and the waitress who used to bring his coffee without being asked began asking if he wanted a menu, the universal signal that familiarity has been revoked. The woman at the post office who had seen Tom photographing Kyle at my house processed Gerald's mail with the crisp efficiency of someone who has nothing personal to say. The church removed Gerald and Diane from the prayer chain email list. Not publicly. The emails simply stopped arriving. In a small city, the silence is the sentence. No one returned their calls. No one sat with them. No one waved from the sidewalk. The space they had occupied in the community closed over them the way water closes over a stone. I want to be honest about what this cost me. People hear a story like this, and they imagine the protagonist walking away clean, shoulders back, wind in their hair, the credits rolling over a triumphant soundtrack. That is not what happened. What happened was that I stood in my kitchen the evening after Mother's Day, and I looked at the counter where Morgan's daisies had been, and I felt a grief so specific and so total that it had a weight. It pressed against my ribs. It sat in the base of my throat. It was not the grief of losing someone to death, which I knew, or the grief of losing someone to distance, which I also knew. It was the grief of looking at your own child and understanding that she measured your life in lot values. I had lost my daughter. Not to death, not to distance, but to a choice she made with her eyes open. She chose the lot value over the mother. She chose Kyle's 4-unit teardown over the woman who made coffee at 5:45 every morning and graded essays until midnight and carried her grandmother to the bath. She chose that, and no amount of evidence or confrontation could undo the fact that my daughter looked at my life and saw a demolition opportunity. The red grading pen sat on the counter where I had set it when I got home from church. I picked it up. I held it the way I always hold it. And I carried it to my desk and I sat down and I graded 3 essays because it was Sunday night and the students needed their papers by morning and the pen still worked, and so did I. In the weeks that followed, I felt the architecture of the lie dismantling itself, not all at once, in pieces. The duplex, which had been a stage for Morgan and Kyle's performance, became a house again. I walked through rooms that had been photographed without my knowledge, and I reclaimed them with the only tool I had: presence. I cooked in the kitchen. I graded at the dining table. I slept in the bedroom with the JCPenney bedspread, and I did not think about the photograph, and I did not think about the investor who saw it. The bedspread still had the small coffee stain near the corner where Marcus used to set his mug while he read before sleep. I had never cleaned it. I never would. I repainted the front door. Not because it needed it, but because Kyle's doorbell camera had been mounted there, And even though Tom Dawkins had helped me remove it the week after Mother's Day, I could still see the screw holes. 2 small dark circles in the wood, like eyes that had been watching. The paint covered them. Bright red, the color of the pen. Janet helped me choose the color at the hardware store, and she said, "That's aggressive for a front door." And I said, "I have been understated long enough." And she laughed. The laugh echoed in the paint aisle, and a stock clerk looked over and smiled, and I thought, this is what it sounds like when the architecture changes. Not a crash. A laugh in a hardware store on a Wednesday afternoon. Janet and I have dinner every Wednesday now. Not because we are investigating anything, because the bond formed through shared pursuit of truth is different from ordinary friendship. It carries the weight of what we uncovered together. Janet saw me at my most calculating and my most vulnerable, and she stayed for both. And that is a rare thing. We eat at the diner on Main Street, the one Gerald can no longer visit comfortably, and we sit in the booth by the window where the light comes in warm and amber in the evenings, and we talk about Janet's grandchildren and my students and the weather, and sometimes, when the mood is right, about the look on Gerald's face when I played the doorbell recording. We never tire of that one. Time has passed. It is Monday, 5:45 in the morning. The coffee is ready. The kitchen is dark except for the light over the stove. I am sitting at the table with 3 essays and a red pen. The refrigerator hums behind me. The clock on the wall ticks. Outside, a bird I cannot see is singing a phrase it will repeat 100 times before sunrise. The first essay is about the Reconstruction era. The student argues that the failures of Reconstruction were not failures of policy, but failures of will, that the structures for justice existed, but the people responsible for maintaining them chose comfort over accountability. I circle a strong paragraph. I write, "Excellent use of primary sources" in the margin. I think about how I will teach this material next week, and I think about how I taught it this year, standing in front of teenagers and saying, history is not what happened. History is what can be proven to have happened. The difference is documentation. I grade the second essay. I grade the third. The sun is not up yet. The house is quiet. Through the kitchen window, I can see the mailbox at the curb, its shape just visible in the pre-dawn gray. It used to hold envelopes from the county courthouse and LLC registrations and letters from people who wanted to dismantle my life. Now it holds my name. Just my name. Leah Shaw, 1142 Tremont Street. At 6:30, I put on my coat and walk to school. The route is 7 blocks. I pass the houses I have passed for 24 years. The neighbors wave. They have always waved, but now the waves carry something extra, a warmth that is also a recognition. They saw me stand up. They stood with me. We do not talk about it. We just wave. I arrive at school. I put my bag down. I write the day's agenda on the whiteboard. First period files in. 112 students will pass through my classroom today, and each of them will receive a paper marked in red ink by a woman who knows what day it is, what year it is, what their names are, and what they are capable of if they learn to build an argument from evidence instead of assumption. I used to think that being strong meant carrying everything without complaint. I was wrong. Being strong means knowing when to set the weight down and open your hands and show people what has been in them. I used to think that family was defined by blood. I was wrong about that too. Family is defined by who stands up when you tell the truth. 31 people stood for me on a Sunday morning, and not one of them shared my last name. If you have spent years carrying a family that measures your worth only when they need something from you, and if they have started calling your exhaustion confusion to take what you built, I want to say this plainly. You are not losing your mind. You are losing your patience, and those are very different things. Tell me in the comments, how many days did you carry them before they noticed you were tired? Studies show that elder financial abuse affects approximately 1 in 10 older Americans, often perpetrated by family members. And caregiver burnout, the kind of exhaustion that rewrites your face and your posture, and your ability to remember where you put your glasses at a Thanksgiving table, is reported by over 60% of family caregivers. Those numbers are people. Those numbers are women like me, sitting in kitchens before sunrise, holding pens, grading papers, carrying the family on their backs, while someone behind them measures the lot. This story has been told. One red pen held at a lectern, one doorbell camera that recorded the wrong truth, and one fellowship hall where 31 people chose to stand. If this reached the part of you that has been carrying something you have not named yet, tell me what it is. Drop it in the comments. Share this with the person who needs to hear it tonight. And I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves,